Welcome back. You're still watching the Daily Debate. As we did see in the past break, a report about the latest activities of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi and the meeting with the military engineers and the directives to be renovating and refurbishing the Ahl al-Bayt, or the relatives of Prophet Mohammed mosques at the downtown Cairo, and the latest developments in Egypt in general in terms of the infrastructure and building new roads and building new cities and constructing new access all over the country. We did see as well in the past break historic footage involving presidents, or the late presidents, Mohamed Naguib, Gamal Abdel Nasser, Mohamed Anwar al-Sadat during the 1952 July 23rd revolution. And finally, we did see promises made by President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi regarding the renovations and building new roads and constructing new cities all over the country. And I'm honored to be having with me in the studio tonight to be shedding more light on the past, the present and the future is Ambassador Mohamed Shazly, the former Assistant Foreign Minister. Thank you very much for being with us tonight on
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak on such a glorious anniversary and the great achievement of the Egyptian people.
Anytime. The honor is mine. Exactly as you mentioned, Mr. Ambassador, the historic achievement, the historic revolution in 1952. How did it change the face of Egypt?
It is very important to know what Egypt was like before 1952.
Yes.
The Egyptian was a second or third degree person in his country. I'll give you a very small example. When one of the prominent people was arrested, for instance, Abbas Mahmoud al-Aqad, he was sent as a sort of a courtesy to what was called the foreigners' prison, Sign al-Aganib, where the treatment for foreigners in prison was much better than the treatment of Egyptians in prison. There is a very important and very hard to digest book by a British lady called Emilia Edwards. The book is called 1,000 Miles Up the Nile. She was making a journey in the Nile at, I think, 1870s. And one of her party went to shoot pigeons, and he shot a small child and injured it. The peasants gathered around the man and took his gun. The dragoman, or the guide, went to the people and told them, I mean, these are Europeans, these are British, don't make trouble with them or it will be harsh for you. So they gave him back the gun. They went to the police and reported that they were being terrorized by the Felahin. As the police ordered the whipping of, I think, 20 people and imprisoning because they just revolted or reacted to an action by a European. Of course, you heard about a very well publicized incident of Den Shuai. What is not said is that in Den Shuai, the British shot and killed 6 Egyptians. And because a British officer died of a sunstroke. After that, they made a trial. They hanged 4 and they whipped several people. This shows you what life in Egypt was like.
Yes.
The dignity of Egypt. Khedive Abbas Hilmi II, in his memoirs, he wrote it by his own hand and by his own pen.
Yes.
He was on an inspection tour, and he criticized the performance of some Egyptian soldiers who've been trained by a British officer. Lord Kitchener was furious, and he demanded that the Khedive of Egypt apologize to the junior officer of British, because he felt that this was an insult to the British military. This was what Egypt was like. There was no dignity for the Egyptian in his land. There was no dignity for even the rulers of Egypt.
Yes.
You are probably too young to remember that my generation, I have seen this myself.
Yes.
If you are a landowner and some of the peasants come because of your accounts with them, they do not dare to enter your house and sit on a chair. They sit on the floor and they call you master, Sidi, and they kiss your hand. Nothing like this happens today.
It's like slavery.
Indeed, you know, look at how the Suez Canal was built when thousands of Egyptians were collected by the corvée or al-Sukhra under the whip. Tens of thousands died. And look how we built the high dam in the 1960s after the revolution.
Yes.
With dignity. The Egyptian who was working building the high dam was proud. Look of how we have built the extension of the Suez Canal now.
Yes.
And compare what the treatment of an Egyptian was like before the revolution and after the revolution. This is the glorious 23rd of July 1952 revolution, which revolutionized Egypt and the Arab world and Africa and indeed the whole of the third world.
Yes, according to the statements of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, it had changes politically, socially and economically, and it went beyond the borders of Egypt to be affecting the peoples all over the Arab world. As you've mentioned, Mr. Ambassador Mohamed Shazly, we will be having a report about the 1952, the July 23rd revolution, so let's see it.
President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi said that July 23rd revolution changed the reality of life in Egypt, achieved radical changes in all fields, and put our nation on the world's political map. His remarks came as he delivered a speech to mark the 69th anniversary of the 23rd of July revolution, paying tribute to the revolution's leader, late President Gamal Abdel Nasser. The president hailed late President Mohamed Naguib as a symbol of the revolution, who bravely answered the call of national duty in a defining moment. President al-Sisi said that time has passed and the nature of challenges changes from 23rd July revolution to wars for the sake of the issues of our brothers, to restoring lands and achieving victory, and to the current challenges including terrorism that the police and army could besiege and weaken. He affirmed that the Egyptian people have always been up to the level of those great responsibilities and have stuck to the values of belonging and sacred loyalty to the homeland. The president said that the current challenge is to change all aspects of the reality of life in Egypt through serious work to achieve comprehensive development based on careful planning and within the framework of a complete national vision and strategy. The president said that the 23rd of July revolution highlighted the firm and eternal relationship between the people and the armed forces that carried the banner of the revolution to achieve independence in the greatest form of challenge, and will uphold the values of justice, pride and dignity.
Welcome back. You're still watching the Daily Debate. Ambassador Mohamed Shazly, as you've seen the statements of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi that everything changed after the 1952, the July 23rd revolution. First of all, politically, how did things change?
Before 1952, Egypt was a satellite of Britain. Had no political will of its own.
Yes.
Let me tell you, for instance, that Egypt did not recognize the Soviet Union until it was allied with Britain in the Second World War. We were permitted then to recognize the Soviet Union. Of course, China was out of the question to recognize. We did not establish diplomatic relations with China except after in 1956.
Yes.
Egypt spearheaded the anti-colonialism and decolonization movement in Africa and in Asia, partly or primarily due to Egyptian efforts. Lots of the African and lots of the Arab and the Asian countries gained their independence. This was not even considered possible during the time of occupation. I think it was in 1919 when the great hero of the Indian independence, Gandhi, was passing by through the Suez Canal, and he wanted to come down to Egypt at the time of the 1919 revolution, and he was not permitted to land in Egyptian territory because of the British. The transformation of Egypt after 1952 is phenomenal, really phenomenal.
On the other hand, economically and socially, we have seen, you've mentioned a number of social instances that happened before the revolution and how it changed after the revolution. On the economic front, how did things change in your opinion?
I think taking into consideration the enormous pressure that was put on Egypt and the economic blockade, Egypt has performed magnificently. I mean, economically, we have built the high dam. We have built the heavy industries, which was, it was dictated to the Egyptians, even in the textbooks in schools,
yes,
that Egypt is an agricultural country, that we cannot participate in industry. We have built industries. We have nationalized the Suez Canal, which is a patriotic feat, but also it's an economic feat. The Egyptianization of key, for instance, banks. At the time, there was only Bank Masr, and the foreign banks were rampant in Egypt. So all of this, shows you that Egypt has performed magnificently in spite of the pressure and the economic blockade that was imposed on Egypt.
On the other hand, the sense of patriotism, as you've mentioned, the national march after the 1952 revolution, how did things change for the Egyptians themselves?
No, the patriotic, let us be here just.
Yes.
The patriotic march precedes the 1952
yes,
revolution. It began with the 1919 revolution. The songs and the anthems that were sung before 1919, you hardly find the adjective or the noun al-Sha'b, the people, with Sayyid Darwish and several of his patriotic Ya Masri, Rise Egyptians, Ana al-Masri Karim al-Unsurayn, I'm the Egyptian of the proud heritage. All of this started with 1919. After 1952, it gained momentum. For instance, a song like the glorious song of كلثوم, مصر تتحدث عن نفسها, was the first performance of كلثوم on the stage after the 1952 revolution. مصر التي في خاطري وفي فمي is also the songs that drove the people in the war of 1956. والله زمان يا سلاحي, which became the national anthem. Allahu Akbar, which later became the national anthem of Libya. All of these were the spirit of the 1952 revolution.
President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, during his speech addressing the Egyptians, he praised the roles of late Presidents Mohamed Naguib and Gamal Abdel Nasser. First of all, late President Mohamed Naguib, how do you see his great role in leading the revolution and the acknowledgement of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi to his role?
Mohamed Naguib was a great man. He was a great soldier. He fought in Palestine in the war of 1948, and he was injured 3 times during the war. He was the candidate against the candidate of King Farouk in the elections of the Officers Club, which was the first public challenge from the army to the king, and that was a great risk. He was the symbol and the front of the 1952 revolution. Nobody can deny Mohamed Naguib. Mohamed Naguib was at a certain point, because of, revolutions are violent affairs. He was denied his role. President Sadat gave him back his right. And now President El-Sisi, we have one of the largest military bases in Egypt, is named after him. He was a great man. Nobody can deny his role. His role was short. Mohamed Naguib was from 1952 until 1954, 2 years.
But it was needed.
He was needed. He was the senior fatherly figure that the young army officers rallied around. And he was a brave man. As I told you, he was a symbol in 1948 war. He was a symbol in defying the king in the elections of the officers club. So nobody can deny Mohamed Naguib's role. Unfortunately, due to revolutionary haggles, which happen in every revolution, he was ostracized for a time, but history always gives you back your right. Nasser had a longer time to. Nasser was a revolutionary. Nasser was a reformer. Nasser was he gained an international status for Egypt through the non-allied movement for the first time. And this is very important in revolutions. We have had many revolutions. We had the 1919 revolution in Egypt. We had Al-Mahdi's revolution in the Sudan. We had Rashid Ali al-Kilani's revolution in Iraq. We had Yusuf al-Azma's revolution in Syria. But they never got the support of other oppressed people. So they failed. Whereas Gamal Abdel Nasser, he rallied around Egypt. The Africans, the Asians, even the Europeans, Tito as a representative of Europe, and even Latin America with Castro. So this was a major achievement of Nasser.
during the speech of President Sisi, also mentioned the challenges that faced Egypt in 1952 and that are facing Egypt now in 2021. How do you see the similarities between the challenges that faced Egypt back then and right now, and the different challenges as well?
I think, you know, the most, we have to realize that Egypt is a key country in history, in geography, and in the international arena.
Yes.
Egypt has resources, has manpower, has expertise, and lots of regional and international players do not want to see Egypt grow, and they are trying to constrict Egypt's growth. This was true in 1952 and the years after the revolution. We have been, exposed to war in 1956.
Yes.
And we have been exposed to war in 1967. These are very strong challenges. Now we are facing challenges. You have, for instance, what is happening in Libya on our western border, what is happening on the River Nile basin, what is happening in many parts of the Arab world, which affects Egypt, because Egypt will accomplish its growth as part of an Arab unity.
Yes.
And what is happening in Syria, what is happening in Lebanon, what is happening in Iraq, what is happening in Yemen affects Egypt. So all of these are challenges that we are trying very hard to face and to mobilize our forces and the Arab forces and indeed all the forces of the peace-loving nations of the world.
If we have a quick comparison between 1952 revolution and 2013 revolution, one was, as you mentioned, Mr. Ambassador, against the occupation represented in Britain. The other in 2013 was against the occupation of heritage, the occupation of culture and even religion in the terrorist brotherhood organization. How do you think we managed to be combating both of them?
The first common denominator between the two is that the army was at the head of both revolutions.
Yes.
The army is, the ultimate prestige of a country. It is what keeps a country together. In the army, there is no Muslim, there is no Copt, there is no Saidi and no Fallah.
No sects.
We are all soldiers of Egypt. We are all there to protect and to preserve Egypt's sovereignty and Egypt's integrity.
One of the similarities between 2013 and 1952, as you mentioned, is the army. How do you see the special relationship between the Egyptian army and the Egyptian people as proven in 1952 and once again, as we can see now, 70 years later, 69 years later, in 2013 and 2021?
I don't want to make a comparison between the Egyptian army and the Egyptian people.
Yes.
The Egyptian army is the Egyptian people.
Yes.
At a certain time in Egypt's history, the army was foreign. You had the Mamluks, who were non-Arabs,
yes,
non-Egyptians, who were the ones who formed the armed forces of Egypt. Today, maybe your brother is in the army, maybe my son is in the army, maybe my cousin, whatever. So every Egyptian has a part in the Egyptian army. Whenever war is declared,
yes,
we are all conscripted, whether we are civilians or... So I don't believe that there is an Egyptian army and Egyptian people. There are Egyptians, and we all complement one another, and we all are a shield and a sword protecting our country.
So what are the main challenges facing Egypt now that we need a political will to be facing them?
I think, the most important aspect is unity. Unity of the Egyptian people. When we start talking about Copts and Muslims, when we start to talk about Salafis and Sufis, when we start to speak about Sa'idis and Fallahin, this is the main challenge. We are all Egyptians. We are all part of the fabric of Egypt, and we have to be very aware against those who are trying to make disunity amongst the Egyptian people. The other challenge is also the unity of the Arabs. I believe that, the United States is the strongest country in the world. Militarily, economically, technologically, yet the United States faces the world through the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. They feel that they need to have a unity with other powers in order to face the challenge of the world. Egypt has to also face the challenge of the world through unity. The Arab world has to unite, not only the Arab world, Africans, Asians. This was the raison d'etre of the non-aligned movement. All the countries that have been abused and will be potentially abused by the imperialistic-minded people should unite and should make a solid front to be able to face this challenge.
Specifically this point, Mr. Ambassador, how do you see this has changed under the tenure of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi ever since 2014 to be building bridges with the Africans and with the Arab world and the entire world as well?
I think, look, for instance, one of the greatest tragedies that faced Egypt is that we have neglected Africa for a while. The President of Egypt did not attend African summits for over 10 years. One of the first moves of President al-Sisi was to reconsolidate Egypt's relations with Africa. He has gone to many visits to African countries to reconsolidate. Also, if you look at the Arab front,
yes,
we have built strong relations with the Gulf countries. We are building strong relations with Jordan and with Iraq. We have been involved in alleviating the tragedies of the Lebanese people in Sudan. So this is the tangent and tangible efforts of Egypt to consolidate the efforts of the Arab front.
And even in the Mediterranean with Cyprus and Greece.
In the Mediterranean with Cyprus and Greece. And if you see the energetic movement of Egyptian diplomacy, the president has gone to Russia, he has gone to the United States, to Germany, to China, Japan. So all of this consolidates. We are not living in a vacuum. We are living in a world where there are neighbors, where there are competitors, where there are big powers, where there are regional powers, and we have to deal with all of these.
And this requires serious work and the change of mentality and the change of the mindset, as we have seen under the tenure of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, that things need to change. Even the pace of work in building new cities, building new roads, building new access, the pace of work itself has changed.
We are not going to live forever. Time is limited and the challenge is great. If we don't use our time industriously, we will never reach our aim.
And this requires planning as well. How do you see the planning under President al-Sisi in the past 7 or 8 years?
Any good work needs a plan. You do not live day by day. You are living, building from today to a future that is different than the future we are living in. Indeed, you know, this is a very important point, because in 1952, for instance, the pace of change in the world was very slow. Today, you know, the technological developments, you know, artificial intelligence, computers, genetic engineering, all of these things, if you don't keep up with them, if you don't accelerate your pace to be do not lose the great leap, the great leap forward that is happening in the world. Your planning has to adapt itself to the new environment of the world.
President al-Sisi mentioned the economic and the social reform programs that were implemented in the country under his tenure and under his leadership ever since 2014. How successful was that?
I think, you know, this is a very important. You know, the economic development has to reach the grassroots of the people. What is happening today under the program of Haya Karima,
yes,
where you are going to the villages and providing humane and acceptable levels of to the poorest and to the weakest portion of the population.
Yes,
I think this is very important, because economy, if it does not change your life to the better, it doesn't make sense.
It is targeting Decent Life Initiative. It is targeting about 58 million people, about 58% of the Egyptian population. How do you see this initiative? How important is this initiative?
As I told you,
especially for the countryside.
It is very important, because if you want a great country, you want a great people. A great people cannot be hungry, cannot be illiterate, cannot be sick, cannot be homeless. So if you provide the basic necessities to the majority of the population, then you will give these people the chance to struggle for the best. What you give them is the basis to start upon. We will not stop there. We will not just be content because we are getting 3 square meals a day and have a roof over our head. No, we want out of these people to beget engineers, doctors, lawyers, diplomats, media people, and so on.
The initiatives of A Decent Life or Equality and Dignity, Haya Karima, Takaful wa Karama, those initiatives, do you think that they are a continuation of the spirit of the July 23rd revolution?
Indeed. I mean, this was the starting point of the July Revolution. One of the slogans of the July Revolution was "Irfa ra'sak ya akhi," raise your head, my brother. Which you cannot raise your head if you're hungry. You cannot raise your head if you're illiterate. You cannot raise your head if you're sick.
President Sisi, during the speech, he said that the effects of the July 23rd revolution, they went beyond the borders of Egypt. They affected the marginalized all over the world, and more specifically in the Arab world. How did he see that back then?
Indeed, I mean, this is what I've been speaking of at the beginning, that
Yes.
it went, you know, in 1952, most of the Arab and the African countries were colonies. Due to the, I mean, look at what Egypt, look at Egypt's support to the Algerian Revolution.
Yes.
Look at Egypt's support to the African countries. Look at Egypt's support to the Arab countries, which were then under reactionary regimes. All of this has the spillover of the July Revolution into the Arab neighborhood and into the African neighborhood.
Mr. Ambassador, you mentioned that the Egyptian army is the Egyptian people, but how did you see the stance of the Egyptian army in 1952, in January 25th in 2011, and on June the 30th in 2013, the stance of the Egyptian army?
The stance of the Egyptian army, I mean, proves historically that the Egyptian army and the Egyptian people are one entity, one indivisible entity. In 1952, the army stood and represented the people. After the announcement of the army's movement in 1950, 23rd of July, look at the amount of demonstrations of the people all over Egypt supporting the army. In the latest revolution, the army was backing the people. So it is, you know, a repetition of history.
Yes, we did see major gatherings during the funeral of late President Gamal Abdel Nasser, as President Sisi mentioned his great role during the July 23rd revolution and his leading role, as you've mentioned, during the course of the episode. What were the main characteristics, in your opinion, that attracted the Egyptians to Gamal Abdel Nasser and the world as well?
Gamal Abdel Nasser was a typical Egyptian. He lived the life of a typical Egyptian. He thought the thoughts of a typical Egyptian. He had the hopes and the aspirations of a typical Egyptian. He never isolated himself from the ordinary man in the street or peasant in the field. So that is why he was so much loved and so much revered by the Egyptians.
Yes, we spoke about the past, how they see the future under President Sisi. We have about 20 new cities, a new capital, the new administrative capital, kilometers of roads, thousands of kilometers of new roads, access, the new Suez Canal. How do you see this revolutionary development in the space of 7 or 8 years?
I think, you know, this is a great step forward. We are laying the basis of the future of Egypt. An infrastructure is the basis of economic prosperity. It is even the infrastructure of social and cultural progress. If you have an infrastructure that permits you to go from one end of the country to the other, this brings the people together. This amalgamates the whole country into one solid block.
Yes, one final important point, the cultural aspect of the agenda of President Abdel Fattah Sisi, that we need to be preserving the identity of the Egyptians and the youth of Egypt. How did he see that in the past years, that he's always interacting with the people of Egypt on the streets, as we've seen in the past couple of weeks or days as well?
Preserving the identity of Egypt, I think, is one of the major challenges.
Yes.
Especially with now the social media, the internet, the cultural invasion that is coming from you don't know where. You know, at a certain time, there were foreign radio and television stations directed to Egypt. It was very easy to. But now, you know, everybody who has a mobile can send whatever material he wants all over the world. This is a very serious challenge. Now you find youngsters writing Arabic with English and Latin letters. You find them using, you know, English and foreign words within their speech.
Yes.
This is a sign of distraction from your identity. If you are proud of your identity, you will not do this.
Yes, and we were proud of the July 23rd revolution in 1952, as well as the revolutions that we've had in the modern history. And we're very proud of having you here, Mr. Ambassador Mohamed Shazly. Thank you very much for being with us tonight.
I'm very grateful for giving me the opportunity to speak on a subject that is very dear and very close to my heart.
Anytime. Thank you once again. And this brings us to the end of the daily debate for tonight, as we did take a look on the 69th anniversary and the celebration of the 69th anniversary of the July 23rd in 1952 revolution, the speech of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, where he highlighted the role of the Egyptian army, the Egyptian people, the unity between them. He praised the roles of late Presidents Gamal Abdel Nasser and Mohamed Naguib, and he spoke of the challenges, the similar challenges that they had back then in 1952 and we have right now in 2021, and the major differences between 1952 revolution and the 2013 revolution. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.